I want to welcome everyone to this COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition webinar on counterfeit mitigation. I'm Taylor Wilkerson with MITRE. I lead the coalition supply chain efforts. And today we will be discussing how supply chain leaders and partners manage counterfeit risks in the COVID-19 supply chains, as well as the tools, resources, and practices that procurement organizations can leverage to make informed buying decisions. This is the second of 3 webinars we are presenting on counterfeit mitigation. The first was presented on November 19th, and the third will be coming up in 2 weeks on November 17th. I want to thank the team that has helped to organize these webinars, including Karen Conway of GHX, Carrie McCarthy of LMI, Fred Kranz of St. Ange, Greg Molthrop of RFXL, Kevin Smith of RFXL, Shelley Pack of RFXL, and Susan Ginnivan and Beverly Wood of MITRE. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the coalition website, which is c19hcc.org. And we will be saving some time for questions from the attendees towards the end of the webinar today. So please post your questions in the chat and we will go through and use those to, or pose those to the panelists towards the end. We are happy to have Karen Conway of GHX with us to moderate today's discussion. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Taylor. And I'm just going to pull up and share my screen. Are you able to see it? Can you confirm that?
Yes.
Let me try to get this into slide mode. There we go. So I am very honored. I have quite the distinguished panel that I will introduce to you in more detail. They have, quite significant resumes, as you can see. What we've tried to do here is, as Taylor mentioned, we did do a webinar previously, and I would encourage anyone to check that out because it really provides some foundational understanding of the breadth and the depth, the severity of this particular issue. And what we're going to do today is focus very much on the operational issues. So you can see here we have representatives of the ecosystem. There's many players, but it really is, this is a team sport. We all have to work together. So we're going to address this from a variety of perspectives, but also have a number of questions that we'll discuss in terms of how the various parties work with one another, and then also an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So quickly, I'm going to share a few of the key takeaways, which I think are important related to the issue of counterfeiting in the healthcare supply chain. And then, as I said, we're going to look at this from an operational perspective and how we can build a counterfeit-resistant procurement environment with the perspectives of the federal government, of the manufacturer and brand owner, of health systems and buyers, and then look at some of the tools that are available related to things like product vetting, vendor vetting, and also track and trace. And as I said, we will have time for questions. So our timing, I think, is quite good, that we are just a week away from the 3rd annual Fight the Fakes week. Fight the Fakes is a group that was primarily started in Europe, but as you will see, counterfeit issues is, the counterfeiting is a global issue. And so it is a global team sport. And there's a lot of good information on their website. But as you can see, they talk about we need coordination across all of the actors in order to be able to address this very significant public health threat. So a couple of the key takeaways from webinar number 1. First of all, counterfeiting can take a lot of forms. Obviously, there's full counterfeiting where, all aspects of the product and the packaging are fraudulent, and somebody is passing this off as legitimate product. But there are a variety of other things. It could be that just a component of a product is fraudulent. It could be a product that has been stolen and is being sold in the market and being passed off as something that is legitimate. And there's all sorts of other different forms as well. And as you'll see, we will also get into issues related to sometimes the product is, is not produced in a quality manner. In other cases, the product as it comes off of the production line is in perfect condition, but something happens between then and when it is actually used. So you actually have issues. For example, as everybody knows, there are some vaccines out there that are going to require being kept at very cold temperatures. Or once the needle has gone into the vial, there's only a certain period of time that vaccine will stay viable and quality. So there's a lot of different issues. It's a very, very complicated issue. It's also an extremely costly issue. This is about a $1 to $3+ trillion problem. Now, not just healthcare products, but across the vast array of products that are in the global marketplace. The International Chamber of Commerce estimates that this could be a $4 trillion problem globally by 2022. The data will show that the majority, not all, but the majority of counterfeit products are coming out of China and Hong Kong. The toll is absolutely significant. Now, certainly if you're a brand owner, there's loss of profits, there's damage to reputation, but there are costs suffered across the supply chain. And the biggest issue is the impact on human lives. There are about 500,000 deaths due to counterfeit products every year. They say about 10% of the world's medicines are counterfeit, but it's certainly worse in certain parts of the world. 80% of medicines in Africa may be counterfeit. So obviously we want to address this. And as I've said before, and as we discussed, and you'll hear more about it in the first webinar, this requires multi-stakeholder collaboration. But there's lots of technologies and tools that you can be using along the way to make sure that the product is at the standard you need it. We need different standards for healthcare than we do for other kinds of settings. And there's different kinds of technology where we can be securing the supply chain. And there's also different kinds of regulation that has been passed. For example, in the United States, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act being one of those. So counterfeiting is a big problem, as I mentioned, and it's a big problem all the time, in part because it can be highly profitable for unscrupulous players, and in some countries, relatively low risk related to, the penalties that happen if indeed you are caught counterfeiting. It's also attractive to organized crime, and particularly in the age of COVID, certainly lots of very legitimate businesses have been impacted economically, but so has organized crime. Their sources of revenue from other aspects of their quote unquote business have been impacted. So there is a lot more attention these days by organized crime. You're also in the midst of a very, very stressful environment. There is a lot of fear, understandably, related to COVID, and considering the amount of people who have contracted the disease and worse, at severe rates and the death, obviously. And there are shortages, and we saw it early on with toilet paper, but when there are shortages, people are fearful that they will not get what they need, and so they may go to extraordinary lengths and sometimes fall victim to these unscrupulous players. And the fact is, as well, is that some of the changes, the regulatory changes that are absolutely necessary in an emergency, can make it easier for these unscrupulous players to take advantage of both organizations and individuals. An example would be, so NIOSH is the organization within OSHA that approves different kinds of respirators. Now, some of those respirators are approved for industrial use, such as at construction sites. There are higher level of standards for those respirators that are used in medical care, but we did have some emergency use authorizations that allowed the use of these other kinds of respirators, or respirators that are not generally approved for use in the United States, but have approved by regulators comparable to the FDA in other countries, whether that might be regions of the world like Europe or Brazil, countries like Brazil or China, et cetera, which can create some unfamiliarity. You may not, I can't read the writing on the box. I'm not used to this particular symbol. What do the regulatory certifications look like? So all of this unfamiliarity creates some of these opportunities, again, for these bad actors to play a role. And in light of COVID, there are a variety of ways that this has taken form. In some cases, it's simply a matter of perhaps it was a treatment that has not been proven, and somebody may be trying to introduce that product or introduce a counterfeit version. You certainly have had issues where, quote unquote, miracle mineral solutions, these different things that have been marketed oftentimes to the general public, are extremely dangerous. They are industrial bleach, for example. You can see here that there are manufacturers like 3M, for example, that has a lot of information on its website talking about how to spot fraud, how to spot counterfeiting or substandard product. And there's also issues that you're going to hear about related to price gouging, not necessarily a counterfeit issue, but it's all about sometimes bad actors taking advantage. And one of the things that's very interesting is a lot of the bad activity has happened on these new online marketplaces, particularly those that are gearing themselves to the general public. Some of the data is quite substantial in terms of the dramatic increase in these new domains and oftentimes linked to criminal networks. So it's just a matter of being very careful. I want to be clear, though, there are a number of online marketplaces, and you can go to the coalition website and see them, that are legitimate, that were stood up for the right purposes. But you need to be aware of those that may not have that. There are so many different resources. I've just offered a few that I've seen that provide some handy tips in terms of how you can spot a fraudulent product or a substandard product, where you can report unscrupulous activity, and particularly some of the things you need to consider if you're purchasing products from another country, not from your normal vendor, et cetera. And as I said, there's a wide variety of public sector resources that our first speaker, I know, is going to be able to give us a little bit more information on. But there's also a number of private sector, and we will be hearing from Johnson & Johnson shortly, and they do a lot of work and are well recognized in this particular area. So with that, I want to turn this over to our first speaker. We are very, very honored to have Dr. Duane Kaniva, who is the Chief Medical Officer for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Kaniva has more than 30 years in public service. He's had roles spanning strategy, policy, operational, tactical levels in emergency response. He served as a medical officer with the U.S. Navy SEALs, the U.S. Marines Chemical Biological Incident Response Force, and as a member of the Shock Trauma Platoon in Fallujah, Iraq. He's also served 2 details to the White House National Security Council staff. And in addition to his work with the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State, Dr. Kaniva has served 23 years in the U.S. Navy. Dr. Kaniva these days is working a lot on counterfeit mitigation, and I will turn it over to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Karen. And thank you for this opportunity, and thanks for that wonderful overview. You've covered a lot of the materials, and what I'll hope to do is to go into some of the detail within the federal family that we're working with in our attempt to reach out to the private sector, build that public-private partnership that is so critical to addressing these kinds of crises. I'm going to share my screen real quick and just to show you, help capture some of the collaborative efforts that we have ongoing. This is it's called max.gov. It's a federal wiki that we use across the interagency to share information in a wiki collaborative format. And what I like about this is it really takes down the barriers for us to work within the federal family to share the efforts in a really a simple way on critical issues. And so let me just go through this page real quick, because I think it'll help highlight some of the issues that Karen was speaking to. First, let me show you a couple pictures. So here side by side, you have two boxes. One is from a legitimate illicit manufacturer in China called Guangzhou Harley in Guangzhou province. And the other is a counterfeit. And even the CEO of the company couldn't tell the difference between the two, other than the shade of red. All of the print, the type, the text was all matched, and the masks themselves were nearly impossible to tell apart without sophisticated testing to test if they met the specification and standards. And one box contained N95 masks that did not protect the wearer, that did not do proper filtering, and the other did. Those from Guangzhou Harley met the N95 specifications as determined by NIOSH. And one thing I'll point out, so you see the NIOSH logo. One company has registered and certified their product with NIOSH, and the counterfeit manufacturer has not. So one of these is also breaking the law in asserting that NIOSH has approved the masks that are inside. And I will point out one additional item on here that has proven to be a real challenge. NIOSH had not previously registered and recorded their trademark and logo with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and Customs and Border Protection. So we ran into some difficulties from an enforcement standpoint, because it was actually not and Guangzhou Harley had not done that either. So this was not an issue of counterfeiting. It was an issue of one manufacturer, even though they had mimicked another legitimate company, they had not technically counterfeited because of the lack of trademarking and recording with the appropriate federal agencies, with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and Customs and Border Protection. So the material had to be removed from the market because it was substandard, not because it was counterfeit. This is an issue because it's much more difficult to remove product and to prosecute for not meeting specifications than it is for counterfeits. Different agencies, different statutes, different regulations that need to be enforced. And by not having that registration, it hinders our enforcement ability to take illicit, fraudulent, substandard material off the market. Here's another example. This is from the internet. Two masks. The only difference between the two is one is fake, one is real, and the type. You can see the typing is a little different, but all of that typing says the same thing. And one of the problems that we've run into as well, we close these loopholes as soon as we find them. But here in broadcasting, posting the difference so that consumers or procurement officers can tell the difference, it broadcasts to the counterfeiters what we're looking at and allows them to make the effective changes that make it much more difficult to detect on just simple visual inspection. So we're working against an enemy that has a vote. They have a say in this battle, and they are not only incentivized, but they're professionals at what they do. They're very agile and very effective at what they do. I wanted to go over a couple of highlights on this page, just to show you some of the other activities. So some critical links, I'll go over some more of these, but I wanted to highlight Stolen Promise because this in many respects is an easy button for industry that I would highly recommend our private sector partners take care of. So Operation Stolen Promise is run out of Homeland Security Investigations in DHS and is an initiative targeting COVID-19 fraud. There's actually an Operation Stolen Promise 2.0. You can see the change in focus. So moving from combating illegal import and sale of counterfeit substandard products to evolving to the health threat posed by illicit sale and distribution of counterfeit unauthorized vaccine and treatment. So we've moved beyond just some of the simple PPE and other commodities, and added the concern for the life safety issues that go with vaccines and treatment. So the commodities that are covered here are not just PPE supplies, but also the medical devices, test kits, active pharmaceutical ingredients, medications, and vaccines, really running the complete gamut of medical commodities for COVID-19 response. And this is just a critical partnership that involves not just the enforcement agencies, but the end consumers as well. We have to really attack this whole supply chain, secure it, and educate the people all along the supply chain. And I'm just going to scroll through here real quick, but 2 easy buttons: how to recognize fraudulent material in the market, and how to report it. The benefit of Operation Stolen Promise and the strategy is it comes with 26 different federal agencies who have a role to play in the enforcement aspect. And so it's a one-stop shop that gets you into all of that federal family for working through the layered roles, responsibilities, and authorities. And I'm going to call Karen out a little bit on this, because this is just a great example of the challenge that you have if you're not familiar with this federal family. So NIOSH, a part of CDC, has the National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory underneath it that is the authority for testing PPE to meet specifications. And it's really the central, and I guess the only federal lab authorized to do that certification. So NPPTL, National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory, under NIOSH, which is a branch under the CDC, different than, and CDC is in the Health and Human Services Department, different than OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Agency, that is in the Department of Labor, that has separate enforcement authorities as well. So really, the two work closely, but depending on statute and regulation and to a degree standards, OSHA adopts many industry standards and enforces those as the federal enforcement authority. Very difficult and confusing to know who's who in the zoo and what do you do. And so keeping that straight is difficult, and Operation Stolen Promise is one simple way to address those issues. And you can see some of the operational statistics. Now, this seems like a lot, but to Karen's point, we're talking in the magnitude of $1 trillion of fraud in a given year, and the ability for enforcement agencies to go after all of this is obviously limited. So in the current supply-demand mismatch that we have under COVID-19, this is a real challenge for those enforcement agencies, unless we work with our private sector partners and consumers and the procurement officers, all doing the level of due diligence that needs to be done. You can see, $21.6 million and $18 million disrupted in transactions recovered funds, but we're talking, tens of billions of dollars of marketplace, and we suspect that that's just the tip of the iceberg for what we need to capture. And then I just wanted to finish up with a couple of just a demonstration, a table that I put together for you to look at the various departments and agencies. So we have a biweekly call we're working with across the federal family to work with the various partners. Here you see under HHS, we've got the NIOSH and the NPPTL. We've got the ASPR under HHS, Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. And this is where our Strategic National Stockpile, BARDA, and the Secretary's Operations Center reside. So, some critical partnerships that have to occur for incident management across the federal family. Who leads what component of this very complex response to COVID-19 and the impacts on the marketplace. We've got FDA, we've got 4 separate offices in FDA that we work with. And just, you think of, okay, we'll work with the FDA on this. Well, FDA has its own bottlenecks and stovepipes within the bureaucracy that need to be recognized as well. So Office of Criminal Investigations, Office of Regulatory Affairs, Counterterrorism and Emerging Threats, and Office of Strategic Partnerships, and the Center for Device and Radiological Health. We've got a bunch within DHS. Federal Trade Commission has a huge role in all of this, particularly with the international trade and the Asian and Southwest Asian manufacturing base that provides a lot of the PPE, the APIs, and medicines. We're working closely with NIST, several offices in NIST, to identify ways to improve the standards or how to apply the current standards. You see there, Department of Labor, OSHA, and then DHS. We've got myself, the Chief Medical Officer in Counter Weapons of Mass Destruction, Operation Stolen Promise, which is again that conglomeration of 26 different enforcement agencies coming together to address these issues in the marketplace that becomes like a one-stop shop. Customs and Border Protection has a huge role to play, and even there they've got several different offices that have huge critical roles to play. CBP's National Targeting Center that looks at all the incoming imported goods and helps us to target those where there may be patterns of fraud. CBP's Pharmaceutical Health and Chemical Center of Excellence, ICE's Homeland Security Investigations, and in ICE's this critical office, the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. If you're a private sector company or business and you have not linked with the IPRCC, you're missing out on a huge advantage for your corporation, your goods, to work in partnership with the federal government to look for fraud and fraudulent activity potentially affecting your business. And then, the partnerships with, again, the federal family are just phenomenal. CISA, which is our Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, we have sector coordinating councils that coordinate across with government coordinating councils to link the private sectors to the government. And let me just scroll down real quick and then wrap it up. Here, Consumer Product Safety Commission, the White House, the IAB, and then our own MITRE COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition that is sponsoring today's workshop. So this is just an example of some of the critical partners in the federal family that we're working with to build that bridge that allows consumers, procurement officers, and industry to cross and function in a way that provides safe goods in the marketplace and secure supply chains. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Karen. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaniva, and thank you for the education as well. This proves it is a complicated matter. I spent a lot of time over the weekend trying to get myself up to speed on certain things, and it's hard to stay on top of all of it. But Operation Stolen Promise, that's fabulous, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was specifically around, if you see a problem, if you have a question, who do you call? So clearly there is an easy button. This is not an easy problem to solve, but there is an easy button. So thank you so much. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, and who comes from a company everybody knows, Johnson & Johnson. And while Roy works in the medical device side of a company that has pharmaceuticals and consumer products and obviously medical products, Roy will bring a tremendous amount of information to us, because really he not only has more than 30 years experience in this space, but Roy pioneered global brand protection at Johnson & Johnson. He currently serves as Director, Global Brand Protection for J&J Medical Devices. And there he leads global strategies to help safeguard patients, consumers, healthcare professionals, and brand goodwill, and focusing on counterfeit, diversion, and other illicit trade schemes, because just even the definition of counterfeiting, as I mentioned before, is complicated. So Roy, thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing your perspectives as a brand owner and a manufacturer.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks everybody. Happy to join the conversation. And you know, the issue of counterfeit is not a new issue in the world of healthcare and medical devices. I've been in this space for many years, and I'm going to share with you an example of a real life counterfeit that we're working on now that I think will help to illustrate some of the proactive approaches we're taking to address this across the supply chain end to end and across the world for that matter. But before we do that, I'd also just like to set a little context in that at Johnson & Johnson, we have a credo that helps to guide us in terms of our actions, and our first responsibility is to the patient, doctors and nurses and folks that use our products. And so it further emphasizes our need to help ensure a safe and secure supply chain for our patients and for the healthcare professionals that we work with every day. Although I'm responsible for medical devices, we've got a broad team, and I've got a colleague that is all about, focus on vaccine security. We know that's a pertinent subject, and Karen asked if I could speak to this briefly today. And of course, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is one of several that are being developed, and is top of mind for our entire country and for the world for that matter. And we have a broad team that is focused on ensuring that we have the appropriate security that's going to be built into this vaccine. And one of the key things for us is to ensure a safe and secure supply chain. We're going to be, as you've likely heard about, we'll be distributing this product through our military, and also through McKesson, which has been the authorized distributor selected. And we're going to and have built in a number of product security features on the packaging to help us identify whether the product is counterfeit or not. And we have a very, what I would call, proactive monitoring program to ensure that we're not waiting for an issue to occur, that we're going to be vigilant in looking for these types of issues to help ensure that we can feel confident in the safety, integrity, and efficacy of the vaccine. So I just wanted to state that up front in advance of jumping into the medical device example I'm going to share with you here. And let me just share a brief background on the particular situation. So we have a real life case study as we speak. This is a product called Surgicel. Surgicel is manufactured by one of our operating companies called Ethicon. And it's a product that's what's called an absorbable hemostat. This is more or less a hospital staple that you see on the shelves with Ethicon suture and so forth. It's used to stop bleeding in patients. It's been around for a long time and been used in 150 million surgical procedures, and it's the brand leader. Unfortunately, it also makes it a very strong target for counterfeiters. And last May, we had a situation where a neurosurgeon who was about to implant this product in a patient's brain noticed something unusual. He felt the product in his hands. He said it didn't roll up properly, and it just didn't feel right. So interestingly, the product was then sent to us at Johnson & Johnson, and we had our experts review the packaging. And the point that was raised by Dwayne is that oftentimes the packaging is extremely difficult to tell whether it's counterfeit or not. But we were able to do so after some internal analysis, and it was pretty clear that the packaging was counterfeit. We also looked carefully at the product and knew that it had a slightly different appearance the way it was folded. And then when we looked at it under a microscope, we could see the weave was different as well. And the thing that's really concerning is the fact that these counterfeit products are non-sterile and could cause some great challenges. And what we're most concerned about, you can imagine if this is implanted in a patient's brain, it could cause serious consequences, including patient death. So it's something we take very seriously. And what we did in terms of a proactive response is our immediate goal is to stop the distribution of this dangerous counterfeit very quickly. And the information I'm sharing with you is in the public domain. What we learned from the hospital that procurement supply chain in their infinite wisdom was trying to save a few bucks, and they bought through an unauthorized distributor with the creative name of Excess Supply based in Florida. And the civil enforcement actions that we took allowed us to go into the facility and immediately stop the distribution of the counterfeit, do discovery, very robust and immediate expedited discovery, which allowed us to confirm where they got the product. And if we summarize this matter, it was interesting to see how a situation that started at one hospital in the US had a very convoluted gray market supply chain that ended up all the way to India. And in a short period of time, we shut this particular situation down. And unfortunately, so far we identified at least 9 countries where this particular counterfeit was identified. But there were a number of solutions that we deployed, which I will provide a little bit more detail here shortly. But we're also working very closely, of course, with law enforcement. So we're taking a combination of both civil enforcement as well as criminal. This is the gentleman, and I use that word lightly, who was identified in India that we caught. He was actually producing this product on his dirty floors in India and then distributed hundreds of thousands of this product around the world. Interestingly, this person had been identified previously with one of our competitors, but very few actions were taken against him, if any, in India. It was largely focused on the US jurisdiction. One of the things that we learned in this matter is that MedServ was supplying product to a company called eSutures, which is a very large gray market wholesaler in Illinois. And again, we replicated our proactive response by filing litigation against eSutures and the civil enforcement. And this past June, we had a massive civil enforcement. This particular warehouse is 2 times the size of a typical Costco. And we seized over 1.3 million items that were on the shelf. It's just the largest civil enforcement that we're aware of in this space for medical devices. And along the course of the journey, we discovered other unfortunate counterfeits, including the ones listed here. So we've got, as we speak, an ongoing collaboration with FDA and law enforcement. We also contacted eSutures customers, and there were thousands of them, about the importance of warning them, first of all, about the potential counterfeit, and number 2 is the importance of buying through either directly through Johnson & Johnson or through its authorized suppliers. Ultimately, that's the key solution to help prevent exposure to dangerous counterfeit. And where in all instances where we've had counterfeit introduced into the supply chain, it's been through these gray market wholesalers. So the best way we can work together to prevent this from happening is to ensure a safe and secure supply chain through authorized distributors. This is just a brief example of the seriousness of the nature of these counterfeits. There's a product called Ligaclip, which is a clip to stop bleeding in arteries. And this particular product was also identified as counterfeit in some customers after we issued our civil enforcement against e-sutures. So to summarize, some of what works in terms of our counterfeit mitigation strategies is that, first of all, our goal is always putting the patient first. And, we want to do that as quickly as possible. And we can't always wait for law enforcement to execute, although we have a great partnership. There are different levels of priority. And in our case, it's all about keeping patients safe. At the same time, we want to focus not only in the US, but ultimately we want to get to the source. And in this case, there's at least 9 countries. We got to go across our borders and work with law enforcement and also civil matters as we go forward. So some things here that are identified that are very important from a manufacturer perspective. First and foremost, if we're going to enforce counterfeit, we got to make sure our trademarks are registered. Otherwise, it wouldn't necessarily be considered to be a counterfeit matter. The other piece, civil enforcement, we like to do that in combination with working closely with regulatory agencies and law enforcement. So we can help to make regulatory and law enforcement's job easier by sharing the discovery and packaging it to make it easier to pursue criminal penalties. And there's a lot we're doing in terms of market monitoring around the globe, not waiting for an issue to occur, whether it's internet monitoring, test buys, intelligence, and so forth. And then we try to do a lot of communications with healthcare professionals to ensure that they're aware of the importance of buying through secure supply chains and ensuring that they're aware of some of the issues. And then the last piece that we spend a fair amount of time is to ensure that we've got product security features in some of our highest risk products to help us identify whether something might be a suspect counterfeit. So that's a quick run through. I realize that there's other folks in the waiting here, but hopefully that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roy. And I think, this just continues to show the complexity of this and the very large team that we need to be working with, whether it's in the public sector, the private sector, or whether it's in the US or internationally as well. You did mention as well, Roy, for example, one of the things that's come to light in the pandemic has been what has been, and I think everybody agrees, a bit of an over prioritization on getting the lowest price for a product. There's been a lot of work in organizations that I know Charlie, our next speaker, has been involved in, whether it's a group called SMI or ARM, which is the Supply Chain Association within the American Hospital Association. We've been working for a number of years, actually since 2013, on what's called Cost, Quality, and Outcomes movement, which is really focusing not on getting the lowest per unit price, but let's get the best product that delivers the best outcomes and lowers the total cost of care as well as the total cost of ownership. But it's challenging, and clearly you can still be looking for that best product and still be a victim of counterfeiting. So Charlie Miceli is our next speaker, and he is the Chief Supply Chain Officer and Network Vice President for the University of Vermont Health Network. He's also served as the Vice President of Information Systems for the network and the CIO for the One Care Vermont Accountable Care Organization. He's also got experience at a number of prestigious institutions from Northwestern Memorial, University of Chicago, Loyola, University Medical Center, and the Partners Healthcare System in Boston. Charlie has a very interesting story to tell because he's been actively engaged in trying to address these critical supply shortages since the beginning of the pandemic. And remember, this covers a lot of different products. So there's lots of different areas of challenge, whether we're dealing with test kits or respirators or surgical masks or vaccines, et cetera, or test kits, all of which have been subject to counterfeit in this challenge. So Charlie, I turn it over to you. I'm going to share your slide very quickly as soon as I can find the deck. So just bear with me. And I think...
Thanks, Karen. I want to thank Fred Kranz too for having me follow a Navy SEAL and an industry innovator. So thank you, Mr. Kranz, for setting this up. But thanks everyone. Good afternoon. I'm gonna step back in the time machine a little bit and go back to Hurricane Maria. And when Hurricane Maria hit in Puerto Rico, we were caught flat-footed, I think, in the healthcare ecosystem, in the sense of knowing that there was manufacturing there, but not to the extent, and what was the resiliency of that, and how did we respond to it, because there were shortages and disruptions in the supply chain. So, we started initially with surveillance of disruptions around the world, and starting to map our items that we purchased to see where they were actually made. And that was a big challenge. And we used a Resolink system, and there's other systems out there that do the same work, but that was kind of like the catalyst or the starting event. And then, when January 21st, there was, more disruption being reported through our surveillance systems, and Curtis Lancaster, who's one of my peers at Dartmouth, and I were on a call, and we said, oh, something's going to happen. So what are we going to do? And who are we going to work with? And subsequently, we met with our partner Medline, and in mid-February, and they told us, yeah, it's going to hit the fan, or it's hitting the fan. We're going to have an issue, but they were transparent with us. They told us what was going on. And right then and there, I started seeing that, wow, we're going from a totally, almost 100% indirect type of procurement, where we're dependent upon the experts, our distributors and our direct manufacturers about product. So we started making that metamorphosis from being almost 100% indirect into direct, and forcing disintermediation in some instances through the distribution channel, because the distribution channel was crippled. And but again, was still important to us, but their efficacy and efficiency was hurt. So as we worked on that, we said, you know what, this, and Karen, you brought this up in our prep call yesterday, it's a tsunami, and you can't do this stuff by yourself. So what we did, and is we looked at, well, who do we work with and who do we work for, that we can get together and try to figure out what the heck we're going to do as things were progressing internationally as well as in the U.S. And in a prior organization, we had a turnaround where we were losing $1 million a day or a month for 54 months in a row, and we were brought in as a turnaround team, and we set up a Aqaba by land, which is out of Lawrence of Arabia, where you cross 600 miles. That was Anthony Quinn and Peter O'Toole. The only way you could get to Aqaba by boat, and you get destroyed by the Turks with their guns, or you could go across the desert. And so I asked Pat Jordan, who's the chief operating officer at Dartmouth Hitchcock Health, I go, can we set up, can we call this Aqaba by land too? And he said, sure. So we branded our pursuit. And we worked with the University of Vermont Health Network and Dartmouth Hitchcock Health got together first. And the good news is we both had nurses and biomed folks and other experts that we could, when we were vetting certain things that we needed to get, whether they were procedure masks were actually tight at that point in time, gowns, gloves, Bittrex, all different types of components that you typically buy. And then our state government at the Vermont state government asked us if we could get together with them too. So we did. So we formed this tripartite alliance, which actually served three states, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York, because we have hospitals in northern New York. Then we started looking at our supplier groups, and obviously, Medline was there, and our consultancy groups that we work with, our support structures that we work with, our GPOs, different manufacturers who helped us, whether it was our analytics companies or whatever. But, just getting together to be able to sense check procurements that we were making to ensure that, number one, we were getting product that was safe, that was vetted, and somebody brought up, the cost structure, and Roy did, I think, having been in this business a long time, I'm going to raise my hand and say, well, I'm guilty of making the price pressures go down on our manufacturers. I work for a manufacturer. I worked for Becton Dickinson for a while, and but also on the provider side and on the distributor side. And when things were back in the 80s, you did the 80s and the 90s, the pressures on the manufacturers were, and the distributors mostly was very intense, because the pressures on the healthcare organizations were very intense. So we're working on supermarket margins and trying to squeeze every penny out of a transaction, and I think that hurt us. And as we've evolved, we started really looking at the cost to serve, and I think that's what we have to do going forward. Is we look at integrity of product, as we utilize resources that didn't even exist or were unknown. I didn't know what SGS was in February of 2021. I never had to deal with it. Didn't understand inspection. I was fortunate where I came up in manufacturing and in cosmetic design back when on my first jobs out of school, and that was in manufacturing services. So I kind of had an idea how direct procurement worked, but to be able to do a test, we always knew. We looked at NIOSH as in OSHA. They were our regulatory agencies protecting us, and our Fed and our government protecting us. But what else was out there? We reached out in the beginning when we started getting 50 to 100, and I'm sure a lot of folks on this call getting hundreds of email solicitations in February and March that you had to filter. That was hard to do. So, and I didn't have time to do it. So I picked a couple of folks in our contracting group, and Dartmouth did the same thing, and our state did. And we started just collecting the solicitations and then starting going through to vet the solicitations. So, where are you from? How long you been in the business? Just basic supplier certification messages. And the other thing is that the cost structure went up. So, we talked about price gouging, but I also understand it in some instances when you go from a 5-cent procedure mask to a 40-cent procedure mask, that's 8x. And that was hard to absorb, especially when you're reporting to the CFO of a company to say, but these guys are legit. This is what it is. We tested it. It's what it was. You know what? And I'm sure my supply chain, hospital supply chain colleagues will either agree or want to engage afterwards. Maybe that 5 cent was too low, because it didn't include resilience in the supply chain. It didn't include reshoring or onshoring of manufacturing capacity. And it was a big wake-up call, I believe. And even, what we call the price at the pump, there's other costs that are in the supply chain ecosystem that you can take out to mitigate, even an 8x. And now it's not 8x anymore. It's in the 3x to 4x range, and hopefully lower as we reshore and onshore, and the market, stabilizes a little bit, hopefully. But as we worked with companies to help us in organizations, our most important one, I think, from my perspective, was our biomedical engineering folks that helped us, because we weren't just looking for masks and stuff, respirators, ventilators, valves, just different types of mitigation on equipment, ensuring that our parts that we were getting, that could support, that we weren't getting, counterfeit parts, but getting manufactured OEM supplies. We had a weekly, we have a weekly meeting with FEMA, with our state, and with the tripartite, and on the regional perspective as well as on the Fed level, and they've been great working with us. One of the things that we didn't have to get into that we got into that we didn't even think about was logistics. We could vet a product, we could say, oh yeah, this manufacturer, it's great. We have the proof of life. We have everything there. We've set up escrow accounts. We've done all the financial protections that we have. We know who these folks are, but they're handling the logistics for us. And in some instances, we had one of our companies we were working with, they were at a plant and there was an auction at the plant. And the Chinese military showed up at the plant fully armed. And these guys were shooting live video to us, showing us what was going on. And so we immediately said, yeah, we probably don't want to go there. And we had met with a company called Transborder Global Freight, which was actually in our backyard out of Round Lake, New York. And one of our physicians in our Northern New York hospitals out of Plattsburgh, New York, said, hey, I know a guy that does business in Asia. So we connected with these guys, and they had boots on the ground in every location. They could go, and we took possession, and that was the most important thing, is so there wasn't a bait and switch, there wasn't a changeover. We had trusted people on the ground that actually went to the plant and picked up the material. And so we took possession right away because we knew that there was interdictions that occurred either by government agencies in Asia or bad people that could come in with a bag of money and take our stuff, and we may be suspect to have other things happen. And but they really helped us out in that respect and working through these processes. The ECRI Institute came up with, they translated stuff for us. So we'd get, labels from boxes or pictures or specifications, again, from trusted sources, vetted sources that are either our medical folks know or we knew or some of our other manufacturing and suppliers knew. And they translated for us and they said, don't go there. This one looks correct. This is a standard that's in Europe. It's not necessarily recognized in the US, buyer beware, which was great. So they gave us that perspective, and then ultimately stood up testing where, MIT had done it, SGS, a couple other folks, and ECRI, somebody that worked in our industry space. And as we, working together and sharing information, I have two health systems here, but, through SMI, through GHX, through just, being in the Northeast and, having worked for 30 years and worked at, 5 different places, you got connections either geographically and or just through industry. And, getting on the phone, we never got hit the first wave. So of COVID, we did have deaths, unfortunately, and that's very tragic, but we didn't have 1,000 hospitalizations like Boston did. We didn't have, 500 that Yale had, but we were on the phone at least 2 or 3 times a week, sharing information, sharing sources, understanding, vetting sources, working through the GPOs were late to the game, but they did participate, and they actually set up some really good programs for vetting and working through. And the other things that, kind of diverted them is they went to the hot spots and stood up, hospitals and supported with staff. So there was, there was participation, but now as things matured, it's a totally different world. We can use our data that we run through, GHX, through the GPOs, through our third-party data resources, and you can kind of do a sniff test. The other thing is that looking at manufacturers, when the Top Glove had the issues with products coming over, through our resilience system, we saw that was an issue. The first thing we did we buy anything from these guys? Because number one, it was going to get stopped at the border. And number two, there were human rights violations that needed to be addressed. And then what happens in Malaysia, whether they have a government shutdown or or product shutdown, where's our product? How is it protected? If it's awaiting inspection, how do we know? We have vetted product, we have it inspected, but we can't get it out of the country. So how is it protected and stay there? So there's a lot of maintenance that goes on even after you buy something that's legit. how do you protect that and keep it legit so it doesn't get substituted and or taken? And that's been our big challenge, and it's continuous. You know, to have the scripts for vetting of sources, we're still getting, you know, the $5 3M 1860 N95 emails. And that's the first question we ask. You know, the folks, the solicitors don't put a cost on it, and then they'll say, well, it's $5, and they're gone as soon as, you know, they're blacklisted, they're out. We meet with 3M and other manufacturers periodically just to get the ground truth from them on where things are and how things are manufactured and the integrity. You know, we were really happy that they went after those folks. We were involved, you know, in the beginning, you know, looking at 8x, 9x times costs of certain products because they weren't available. And luckily, none of those came to fruition. So, and we had our money protected, so it was good. But, you know, the vetting that went on, the dialogue and the continued work, all these companies that are on this list worked with us and either supported us, protected us, or provided us with either service or support. It's kind of weird. Concept 2, which is sitting right underneath the Vermont National Guard. I don't know how many CrossFitters are out there, but they make rowers and skiers and erg bikes. They're based out of Vermont. And but they had a lot of manufacturing capability and trusted suppliers over in Asia. And they basically were shut down because we had a shutdown of all non-essential businesses. So we used their logistics, which was tried and true, and we used their resources to help us resource material in manufacturing, which was good. Karen, that's all I have to say about that. I want to make sure that, you know, folks got, you know, I again really appreciate the information that's already been shared through the coalition, and then also with the two folks that presented before me. Mine's more telling a story versus and how we did it and how we're doing it, but we can always get better. And the resources and the support from that J&J is doing, I didn't know that existed. That's phenomenal, and I think that's a great story to be shared and told around our country. So, and thanks, Dwayne, for your work too. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Charlie. I mean, it's just, I think if you haven't sat in the supply chain in any of these seats, if you will, I think you've got an appreciation for just how complicated it is in normal times. You know, so this counterfeiting issue and our ability to mitigate is going to be a lasting value that's come out of this very, very difficult time. But it's obviously even more complicated during times of disaster, during times of pandemics. I'll make one comment. It was interesting. So I was talking to Joe Dudas, who is with Mayo Clinic, and he was talking to me about, Charlie mentioned the importance of talking and working with your vendors, working with the manufacturers, because they had been offered at Mayo a huge amount of 3M N95 respirators. And basically 3M said there is no way that amount of respirators even exists. That's your first flag, et cetera. Our next speaker, unfortunately, our thoughts and prayers are with him. He's not feeling well today, and so we hope it is not something serious. But I just want to quickly make a few mentions about Raj Sharma, the CEO of Public Spend Forum and GovShop, and the work that organization has done. Again, another case study in terms of collaboration. There was a term that one of Charlie's counterparts in Texas used called IGAG. People were getting inundated with these calls from people saying, I got a guy who's got the supplies you need. And so quickly, a number of us got together. So GHX, in addition to operating an exchange for supply chain transactions, we do some vendor vetting. And so we worked with, we're just one player who did this, but we worked very closely with the American Hospital Association and started doing some pro bono vendor vetting met a number of other organizations, as Charlie mentioned, also did some vendor vetting. You know, is this a legitimate business? Is it on a government sanctioned list? Has it declared bankruptcy? Does it have a business license? There were a number of other organizations that started doing that as well as organizations that were doing the vetting of the actual supplies. Are the supplies meeting the standards that they say they can do? And what we were trying to do, and we were posting these, for example, on the ARM, which is the Supply Chain Association of the American Hospital Association website, so that people didn't have to do all the initial vetting themselves. And then we started posting information on product vetting, and we also started creating an ability for crowdsourcing. So if Charlie saw a vetted organization as an example and did some business or tried to with them, and it was a good experience, he could say so. If it was a bad experience, so we were kind of crowdsourcing this experience. So Raj's company was working very closely with the National Governors Association and a number of other organizations doing this, and took on the task of basically aggregating. So you could go on and you could say, oh, look, this product has been vetted by several organizations. This vendor has been vetted by several organizations, which gives you a little bit more confidence that maybe you should start pursuing that a little bit. And that is set up on GovShop. So I would encourage anybody to check out Public Spend Forum and, most importantly, GovShop, as well as ARM, which is ahrmm.org. And you can also see this information as well. Another key piece of this, as we've talked about, you can see kind of this global nature, and the counterfeiters will oftentimes move product all around the world, making it even more hard to be able to discern if something is legitimate or not. And so our next speaker, Atul Mohidikar, is the Chief Technology Officer of a company called RFXL. And he's also the SVP of Products and Engineering. He spent 25 years working with startups to very large enterprise software companies, and has expertise in everything from raw material traceability to the use of Internet of Things and machine learning, all the way to recall management, all of these aspects. And he's going to pull this all together for us. And then I am going to encourage you, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some questions, and please do put those in the chat. But at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Atul to kind of take us home and put all the pieces together for us. Atul.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? There you go. So I work for, as Karen said, I work for a software company called RFXL. We are a software provider, and there are a couple of slides about what we do and who we serve. But mainly I'm going to focus on the following four options that I have presented here for the supply chain traceability and securing the supply chain that have been used all over the world. So this is who we are. We are a software company. We've been around for a long time, as you can see from these slides. We are a mature software company in terms of products. We have over 200 customers who are using our product, mainly in the pharmaceutical supply chain. But we also have customers in other industries such as food and beverage and consumer goods and so on. We have people all over the globe, as you can see. We used to be based in the Bay Area at San Ramon, but last year our headquarters moved to Reno, which you can see the picture of our headquarters there. Brief introduction to our products. The basic foundation of all our products is a RFXL traceability system that is used for compliance management, used for traceability, for supply chain visibility. And I'm going to talk about a few of these, especially the first three ones: compliance management, serialization, processing, and integrated monitoring. in the subsequent options that I'm going to present here. A few of our kind of marquee key customers, as you can see from the slide, that we have customers from the upstream supply chain, the contract manufacturers, to middle of the supply chain, which are wholesalers, distributors, to the downstream supply chain, like retailers, pharmacies, hospitals, for example. I saw, I think it was Charlie's slide that showed a couple of our customers, Medline and Baxter. Baxter is a big global manufacturer. Medline is a distributor, but we also have Cardinal, one of the largest wholesalers, pharma wholesalers in the US. The downstream supply chain, Walgreens is our customer, Kaiser is a customer. There are smaller pharmacies and clinics that are also our customers, and our customers span the entire world. So some of these names which are known here in the US, but others such as Zelia, which is based in Denmark, RB is based in the UK, Eisai based in UK too, Sun, which is the largest pharmaceutical company in India, and so on. So here is compliance management all over the world. The goal of each of these pharmaceutical compliance laws that are passed all over the world, and I've shown some of these countries that have these laws, is the same: to secure the supply chain, to prevent the counterfeit products from getting into supply chain. And there are multiple ways, depending on which country you look at, there are multiple ways that different countries have adopted, different approaches the countries have adopted. So all the countries that I've shown at the top have these laws, and there are more. But what they essentially do is they ensure that all the products that are medical products or drugs and medicines that are part of the pharmaceutical supply chain are traced from the origin of the product, which is the manufacturer or MAH, marketing holder, all the way to the dispenser, which is the pharmacy or a clinic or hospital. And some of the laws don't need, they don't track the product in the middle, which are distributor dispensers, but they are definitely tracked when they are dispensed to the patient to make sure only authentic products get dispensed to the patient. And authenticity is verified with the manufacturer. The manufacturer is the only one who records these products typically with a central hub, and I have some slides to cover that. At the bottom of the slide, you see multiple sort of private hubs that have been set up. Actually, the first one, Bahrain, is not a private hub, but for all the ones at the top, our system, our software is used to create the compliance reports that need to be submitted to the governments. At the bottom, our software, for example, for Bahrain, our software is used to implement the hub itself, where all the supply chain traceability transactions are recorded. ICRC, this is the International Red Cross. Our system is used as a hub that is there, as kind of a private hub, which they use to track the products or the products that they distribute in multiple countries. We are also a part of the steering group that UNICEF and the World Bank has put together, which is working on the COVID supply chain. They want to make sure that the COVID vaccines that are soon to be released, as we all know, are tracked, and only authentic vaccines get dispensed to the patient, and their span goes in, I believe, more than 90 countries. So we are involved in that effort too. So here are a few of the options for supply chain traceability that secure the supply chain. And all of these have been used. Actually, when DSCSA law, the US pharmaceutical law that went into effect in 2015, used lot-based traceability, where the manufacturers of the product basically, when the products are shipped from the manufacturer to distributor and from the distributor to the dispenser, every owner of the product sends the information about the lot and the quantities of the lot that are shipped to the next supply chain trading partner. And the next supply chain trading partner can only receive the lots that for which they have received the electronic information about the product. So that secures that ensures that no counterfeit lots get introduced in the supply chain. So this is actually a low cost option, and that's why it was adopted as phase one of the U.S. Law. In fact, U.S. is the only country that had this lot-based traceability as one of the phases of the compliance. And so again, this is a least expensive option, but it's also not as granular. You cannot check individual product units whether they're authentic or not. You can only check the lot, whether they have a right lot. You can also check, obviously, the expiry date. You can also check whether they have followed the right authentic supply chain by looking at the history associated with each of those products that are being moved in the supply chain. In certain situations, certain lots can also be, although this is not used in the US, but certain lots can be restricted to be dispensed or distributed in certain areas or certain regions or certain countries. So you can kind of build a geo fence about the lot, and if certain lots are found in other areas or other countries, then you can detect those as not the valid lots to be distributed in those countries. So this is kind of a lower hanging fruit, and hence it was adopted as a first phase of securing supply chain in the US. So that leads me to the second one, which is widely used all over the world for securing the supply chain. This is called serial number based security. Essentially, what this means is the manufacturer is responsible for creating unique numbers and encoding those into barcodes that are applied to individual products that are shipped in the supply chain, distributed in the supply chain. And there is a higher cost because the manufacturer has to create these barcodes and then create the unique serial numbers. But individual item, individual product unit can be traced using that serial number. So at any point in the supply chain, any trading partner in the supply chain, whether it's a distributor, wholesaler, dispenser, or even a consumer, can scan the barcode and find out whether that particular unit or particular product that is held in the hand is authentic, because that information about every product that is distributed in the supply chain is recorded in typically a central hub. So all these countries that I showed in the previous slide, except US is different. They have set up these central hubs where the manufacturers are supposed to upload the unique serial numbers, and during dispense operation, the dispenser needs to check against that central repository to make sure that the specific product that is being dispensed to the patient is actually authentic, was created by a authentic manufacturer. Now, again, although there is a higher price to pay here, but you get lot of benefits out of it, because, as I said, that you can trace to the individual product level. Also, because COVID vaccines are not just COVID vaccines, but some of the COVID products are prescription products, and they have to follow the global compliance law for prescription products. So they need to be serialized anyway. So since they are serialized, you can ensure the security of those products. Also, while creating these, one of the ways these they're hard to get. So you don't create serial numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if a person or a counterfeiter gets hold of one of the serial numbers, you can kind of predict what are the other authentic serial numbers. So by creating randomly generated serial numbers and leaving kind of holes in the serial number generation, so you're not creating serial numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but you're creating number 1 and 10 and 15 and 120. You don't know which serial numbers are authentic. So if a counterfeiter gets hold of one of the serial numbers, he or she would have a hard time predicting or guessing what are the other valid serial numbers. And this is used in many parts of the world, especially in EU law, mandates this randomization of serial numbers. And so, as I've mentioned, that there are these hubs that have been set up because of these pharmaceutical law. And this is not just in the pharmaceutical industry. There are other industries, especially in Russia. Similar to pharmaceutical, different other products are also tracked using these hubs, such as even shoes or apparel, tobacco, cameras. So there are these other laws which kind of follow the same approach of track and trace. And I've already explained how these hubs work. Basically, the manufacturer puts the authentic products into the hub, and then during dispense, they are checked against the dispense operations are checked against the hub to make sure that only the authentic products get dispensed. As a side effect of tracking or tracing these products, you also get inventory visibility because the hub is kind of tracking the history of the products, and the hub knows where the products are, whether they're a distributor or a dispenser, and that could be very invaluable in situations like COVID, because we know that there are at least initially next year there are not going to be enough number of vaccines manufactured by the manufacturers. So it's good to know where which areas of the country or the world are lacking the vaccines, and which area may have excess vaccines, and you can kind of move the products from one region to another region. Again, these hubs can be set up multiple ways. I've given some examples here. You can have like a federal level hub set up by U.S. government that is responsible for tracking all the COVID-related products, including vaccines. The states themselves can be proactive and set up their own hubs. In fact, in the cannabis area, I think the states have set up such traceability hubs to ensure the traceability and security of the supply chain. All the states also can kind of collaborate and set up a hub that is shared by multiple states. But there are other hubs that are set up by NGOs or can be set up by even government agencies, like what Dr. Mentioned earlier, that VA department or Department of Home Security can set up its own hub that says all the COVID-related products need to be dispensed using or tracked and dispensed to ensure the security of the supply chain. So these are different ways of handling the security of the supply chain. These have been adopted in multiple countries, including US. I also mentioned at the bottom of the slide that to kind of get the higher and quicker adoption of for securing the supply chain, the states can offer incentives. There is a carrot and there is a stick, so they can either mandate or they can offer incentives to further supply chain training for this. This is actually another aspect. IoT devices can be used for, typically these are used for high risk and high price products, such as, and I would say at least initially next year, COVID vaccines fall into that category because they're going to be very few compared to the large population that needs these vaccines. So they are kind of higher risk. And hence you can have like an IoT device that is attached to the pallet that is containing 10,000 vials of the vaccine, so that you know exactly. And in these sensors, basically, depending on the device that you pick, they can not only track the movement of the product in the supply chain to know exactly where the vaccine is, but as was mentioned earlier in this webinar, all the COVID vaccines need to be temperature controlled. So these IoT devices also have temperature sensors, so they can not only track the location, but they also sense the temperature, and we can set up alerts if the temperature goes above a certain range or below a certain range. the alerts are sent out, and if the alert goes out in time, you can take corrective action and prevent the loss of the damage to the product itself. So this IoT-based traceability is kind of new, but it can be applied in addition to the other approaches that I mentioned. So in summary, the takeaway is there are these options that have been used all over the world, and they can be adopted for as far as securing the COVID supply chain too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atul. I think clearly anybody who's been listening sees how complicated this is. Unfortunately, we're nearly out of time. I'd love to do a quick round robin of every one of our speakers. If there was one thing you want us to focus on to strengthen counterfeit mitigation going forward, not just in times of pandemic, but is there, what is the one we could do a word, or you can do a phrase or a sentence. What should we be focusing on as we move out of the pandemic and we work to secure the supply chain? And I'll start with Dr. Kaniva, if I could.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think for me, it would be building that public-private partnership, that bridge between public safety, law enforcement with public health, healthcare, and making sure that bridge is wide enough for the consumers, the procurement officers, and industry to cross back and forth.
Excellent. Roy?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think there's one thing that we can do to ensure a safe and secure supply chain. It's really essential to purchase the products either directly through the manufacturer or its authorized distributors. If we go beyond that, then we run out of space, and in every instance where product is acquired from a gray market or a non-authorized source, this is where we see counterfeit being introduced.
Thank you. Charlie?
Read Operation Stolen Promises 2.0 and whatever else comes forward. That's a great resource. And, resiliency of the supply chain is a national security concern, and we need to protect that. So, accessing that material is great.
Great. And Atul, final comment from you?
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Kaniva. The collaboration between the state or government officials as well as the private industries is essential. With a little bit of technology, we can achieve this supply chain security for COVID-related products.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'll turn this over to Taylor just to close us out. Thank you to all of our panelists for the tremendous amount of information, and to those who are attending, and for your attention today.
Thank you very much, Karen. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially Karen Conway for moderating, and our panelists, Roy Alviani, Dwayne Kaniva, Charlie Miceli, Atul Mohidkar, and Raj Sharma, who's unfortunately unable to be with us, but want to thank him for helping to set this up as well. The recording on this webinar will be posted on the COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition website, which is c19hcc.org. And we invite everybody to join us for the third in this series, which will be on December 17th. And just as Dr. Kaniva was talking about public-private partnerships, this third webinar will focus on the importance of coordinating across industry, public sector, and the healthcare sector to mitigate counterfeits. So I hope you all will be able to join us for that as well. Information on these webinars will be posted on the Coalition website. And thank everybody again for attending, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.